The year was 247 BC, and a 13-year-old boy sat trembling on the throne of Qin, one of 7 warring kingdoms tearing China apart. His name was Zhang, though history would remember him as Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. But on that day, he was just a frightened child surrounded by vultures disguised as advisors, inheriting a kingdom drowning in political intrigue and existential threat. His story began with rejection and humiliation that would have broken most men before they even became one. Zhang's father had been a hostage prince in the enemy state of Zhao, and the boy spent his early years there, despised, mocked, hunted by those who saw him as a symbol of Qin's aggression. He learned to sleep with one eye open, to trust no one, to understand that power was the only language the world respected. When his father miraculously became king of Qin and brought him home, the boy thought his nightmare had ended. Instead, it had only begun. Within 3 years, his father was dead under suspicious circumstances. At 13, Zhang inherited a throne he was too young to defend, and a court filled with men who saw him as a puppet, a convenient figurehead while they carved up power among themselves. The most dangerous was Lao A, his mother's lover, who commanded armies and plotted openly to place his own sons on the throne. The boy king was trapped in his own palace, a prisoner of those who should have served him. But this wasn't just about one young ruler's struggle for survival. The Warring States period had torn China into 7 kingdoms, locked in 3 centuries of brutal conflict. Millions had died. Farmlands lay scorched. Families were shattered. Culture and philosophy flourished, even as civilization teetered on the edge of permanent fracture. Each kingdom developed its own currency, its own writing system, its own measurements and laws. China wasn't a nation, it was a collection of hostile territories, united only by shared language roots and mutual hatred. The consequences of this endless war reached into every village and every home. A farmer in one kingdom couldn't trade with the next. Scholars couldn't share knowledge. The brilliant philosophies of Confucius, Laozi, and countless others competed in what historians called the 100 schools of thought, but their wisdom couldn't heal a land that bled from 1,000 wounds. If someone didn't unite China, the fracture would become permanent. The Middle Kingdom would splinter into separate civilizations, and the unified Chinese identity we know today would never exist. And trapped in the middle of this chaos was a teenage king who couldn't even control his own palace, let alone change the world. Everything changed when Zhang turned 22. After years of playing the obedient puppet, he had been watching, learning, planning. He had befriended the one man he could trust, Li Si, a brilliant scholar who believed that China's salvation lay not in philosophical debate, but in absolute centralized power. Together, they began to see a vision that was both terrifying and magnificent. One China, one emperor, one system of everything. The moment came when Lao A finally overplayed his hand, launching an open rebellion to seize the throne. But the boy who had trembled at 13 was now a calculating strategist at 22. Zhang had quietly secured the loyalty of key military commanders. When Lao A's forces marched on the capital, they found not a frightened puppet, but a king who had set a trap. The rebellion was crushed in a single brutal day. Lao A was torn apart by chariots. His own mother was placed under house arrest for her betrayal. And every courtier who had underestimated the young monarch suddenly realized they had been playing chess with a grandmaster. From that moment, Zhang stopped being a king trying to survive and became an emperor determined to transform the world. What followed was 17 years of military and administrative genius that rewrote the rules of statecraft. Zhang didn't just want to conquer the 6 rival kingdoms, he wanted to make conquest inevitable through a strategy that blended warfare, diplomacy, and psychological operations centuries ahead of its time. He employed a network of spies and assassins to destabilize enemy courts. He used Jin's superior iron weapons and crossbow technology to overwhelm opponents on the battlefield. But his true innovation was administrative. He standardized everything within Qin first: currency, measurements, agricultural practices, creating an economic and logistical machine that could sustain continuous warfare while rival kingdoms exhausted themselves. Kingdom by kingdom they fell. Han in 230 BC, Zhao, the state that had tormented his childhood, in 228 BC. The satisfaction of that conquest must have been intoxicating. Wei in 225 BC. Chu, the largest and most powerful, finally fell in 223 BC after a campaign that required every ounce of Qin's military might. Yan in 222 BC, after their king sent an assassin who nearly succeeded in killing Yingzhang in his own throne room, a moment where a dagger thrust missed the king by inches and changed the course of human history. And then came 221 BC, the year that echoes through millennia. The last independent kingdom, Qi, surrendered without a fight, its leaders recognizing the futility of resistance. After 300 years of war, after millions of deaths, after centuries of fragmentation, China was unified under a single ruler for the first time in its history. But Yingzhang didn't just declare victory, he declared something unprecedented. He would not be merely a king, because that title was insufficient for what he had accomplished. He would be Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. And he would create a unified empire so thoroughly standardized, so completely integrated, that it could never fracture again. The changes came with ruthless efficiency. One writing system for the entire empire, ensuring scholars from distant provinces could communicate. One currency, so merchants could trade from the Yellow River to the Yangtze. One system of weights and measures, one width of cart axle so every road would accommodate every vehicle. He connected and extended defensive walls into what would become the Great Wall, a monument so vast it would be visible from space 2,000 years later. But unity came at a terrible price. Yingzhang burned books and buried scholars alive who questioned his authority. He uprooted aristocratic families and forced them to live in the capital where they could be watched. He conscripted hundreds of thousands to build his projects, including a tomb guarded by an army of 8,000 terracotta warriors, each with an individual face, standing eternal guard over an emperor who feared death as much as he had once feared powerlessness. The first emperor's reign lasted only 11 years after unification. He died in 210 BC at age 49, still touring his empire, still trying to find the secret of immortality. His dynasty collapsed within 4 years of his death, torn apart by the same brutal methods that had built it. But here's what survived: the idea of a unified China. Every dynasty that followed, Han, Tang, Song, Ming, Qing, built on the foundation Qin Shi Huang created. The standardized writing system he imposed became the glue that held Chinese culture together across vast distances in different spoken languages. The administrative divisions he created shaped Chinese governance for 2 millennia. The cultural identity of being Chinese, of belonging to a single civilization despite regional differences, was his gift to history, purchased with rivers of blood and mountains of suffering.
His story asks us to confront an uncomfortable question. Can ruthless means be justified by transformative ends? Was the price of unity, the burned books, the buried scholars, the forced labor, the authoritarian control, worth the creation of a unified civilization that would become one of humanity's greatest continuous cultures?
So, what do you think? Was Qin Shi Huang a visionary who saved Chinese civilization from permanent fracture? Or a tyrant whose brutality set a template for authoritarian rule that echoes through Chinese history to this day? Could China have unified through less violent means? Or was ruthless force the only language that centuries of warfare had left the warring states capable of understanding? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of ambition, unity, and the terrible price of empire fascinated you, Hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of leaders who changed the world, for better or worse. Because Qin Shi Huang's legacy reminds us that history's greatest achievements often emerge from its darkest chapters, and that the line between visionary and tyrant is sometimes only drawn by time's judgment. Share this with anyone who believes one person can't change the world, because 23 centuries ago, a frightened boy became an emperor who proved that one person can reshape civilization itself.